Hello and welcome to Mr. Valentine's YouTube video for Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet. We're going to take a look at several literary terms, in-depth analysis of some passages, and a general plot summary of what's going on in our story thus far. So first up, literary terms. All right. Currently, we're in the complication of our story. Remember, the complication are the events leading to the climax. So this is kind of the vital information that occurs throughout our story. It builds up ideas and themes and ideas until they reach their peak in their climax. In our story, we have many monologues. All right, a monologue is a long, uninterrupted speech. A soliloquy is a specific type of monologue. It's a long, uninterrupted speech. All right, it's where the character reveals private thoughts and the character is alone on stage. An aside, like a soliloquy, is when a character reveals private thoughts. However, there are other characters on stage. Sometimes these private thoughts are revealed to the audience. Usually that's the case. Other times, however, the private thoughts are revealed to other characters. A metaphor is a comparison that does not use like or as. Hyperbole, we see a lot of hyperbole in Romeo and Juliet between lovers. A hyperbole is an exaggeration. We also see personification, which is giving lifelike qualities to non-living or inanimate objects. We see many allusions with an A. An allusion is a reference to a literary or historical person, place, or thing. We see many examples of foreshadowing, especially towards the end of the novel. All right. We see foreshadowing, which is a subtle hint at future events. So information revealed in this scene will relate to the end of the novel. And of course, we also have a simile, which is a comparison that uses like or as. Those are our major literary terms for Act 2. Act 2 begins with the prologue, just like Act 1 does. What I thought was a very important quote is the very first sentence, which says, "Now old desire doth in his deathbed lie." So my question is, what literary term do we see at work here? Now old desire doth in his deathbed lie. Notice, all right, they're talking about desire. And what are they calling desire? They're calling it old. Can desire really be old? All right, and is it enough of a plurality to call it a his? All right, No, obviously not. So we have example here of personification. All right. The rest of the prologue goes as predicted. All right, you see the usual Shakespearean rhyme scheme. All right, you should note the Shakespearean rhyme scheme if you haven't. It's A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G G. Good. Act 2, Scene 1 is a very quick scene. We see Romeo hiding in the background, and Benvolio and Mercutio kind of talking about Romeo. And there's a lot of playful wordplay, right? A lot of sexual innuendo. All right. They talk about him spending the night with a lady. Around line 24 of Act 2, Scene 1, he says this cannot anger him. 'Twould anger him to raise a spirit in his mistress circle. And so this circle, this magic circle, becomes a symbol, and it envisions certain body parts of both the male and female persuasion. So we see this kind of overly developed language in Mercutio. And I don't need to go further into it. It's in every single line. If love be blind, he says in line 34. If love be blind, love cannot hit the mark. Now will he sit under a medlar tree. And all these different little things, love hitting the mark, the medlar tree, they're all different symbols of sexual promiscuity and whatnot. All right, so my question is, why might Mercutio's wordplay be so sexual in nature? And I think, yes, of course, we have categorized Mercutio as kind of this bawdy and flamboyant character. And so that's part of his personality, naturally. But I wonder if maybe there's an insecurity that lies in Mercutio. Right? Is Mercutio completely secure with the idea of losing Romeo? And I think it's something to consider. It allows for a different type of reading. All right, it makes Mercutio possibly, all right, a more developed character if we lend this kind of lens to it. So it's something we should consider at the very least. All right. Benvolio just kind of plays along throughout this scene. Act 2, Scene 2, is the first scene we're really seeing Romeo and Juliet truly interact. So we have this scene in this picture where we have Romeo kind of, hanging out at the bottom here, and Juliet reaching over. And I think there's a certain comical aspect to this, of this guy watching her. And so I think that's something we want to consider, all right, that our play for much of the time feels like a comedy. That as much as the story is a tragedy, there's a lot of funny bits, and there's a lot of this promise of marriage. And if Romeo and Juliet actually got married in the end and the story ended, all right, would we call it a comedy? Even if the characters that we know are going to die, but Romeo and Juliet still get married and they live happily ever after, would we call it a comedy? It's something to consider, because I think, in that instance, we would. And maybe they would categorize it, as they do with some of Shakespeare's plays, as a romance. But even that, I'm not so certain. It doesn't feel like a romance in the same way that other plays, like The Tempest, feel like a romance. So it's something to consider. So Romeo is watching Juliet. And if you have your text, this is Act 2, Scene 2. And he's viewing Juliet, and this is around line 3 and 4, where we see this strong metaphorical language. So starting with, but soft, What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. So we get that strong metaphor where Juliet is immediately compared to the sun. All right, and when we think of the sun, we think of this beautiful and cosmic image. So I think that's an appropriate image. Something otherworldly, I think. So he goes on, and he begins to say that though her maid art far more fair than she, be not her maid since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green. And vestal means virgin, all right, in this instance. And I think that's important because that was kind of a deal breaker about Rosaline, that she was this virgin. And so it's interesting that Romeo mentions virginity so early on. If you have the Degani, Barnes & Noble Shakespeare, which is a great edition with many notes, it gives a note about this. It says, her vestal livery is but sick and green. And on page 120 it indicates, this is probably a reference to the common early modern presumption that green sickness, a form of anemia that attacked pubescent girls, resulted from prolonged virginity. All right, and so Romeo is hoping that maybe Juliet isn't a virgin, all right, or that her virginity will wear off. And at the end of it, he kind of moves away from the virginity because he's so enamored with her beauty. He says, around line 11, oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? And so in that instance, it means, what does that matter? All right, so what does her virginity matter? What does she say? Does that matter? All right. And it verges on a certain amount of creepiness, I think. I think we can call Romeo a bit creepy at times. Because he says, as he's watching her, and this is around line 22, that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. So he envisions himself as a glove on her hand. It's a peculiar moment. It's kind of, I would certainly say, creepy. And Juliet has one of her most famous lines as he's watching her speak, right? And he just wants her to talk. He's so in love with her immediately. And Juliet says, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" And I think that's kind of a huge moment, all right? Now, in this instance, wherefore doesn't mean where Romeo. All right, Romeo's hanging underneath the balcony, so we know where he is, and I think it would be dramatic irony if she was saying, where's Romeo? But that's not the case. She's saying, why Romeo? Why are you a Montague? And she continues with this idea of how much does it matter what his name is. And on line 42, she says, belonging to a man, oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So here she's acknowledging that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that a rose is still a rose, no matter what the name is. And so we get this very tender kind of moment. And then Romeo reveals him to himself, and immediately they're in love with each other. If you continue further on around line 105, she says, therefore, pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love, which the dark night hath so discovered. Juliet is saying right at this moment that her love is serious. Now, granted, they've known each other for, let's say, an hour, and that might be pushing it. But that said, she feels her love is serious, and she feels that way, and he feels that way. So we can assume that their love is serious. But of course, once we're introduced to Friar Laurence, we kind of get a different perspective. And so they do this whole, all right, well, I'm saying goodbye, so you say goodbye first. And then she says, no, you say goodbye first. And he says, no, you say goodbye first. And she's like, no, you say goodbye first. So we kind of get this overt, all right, well, I'll see you later. No, I'll see you later first. Or, well, I'll see you later the firstest. All right, it's this kind of overt, cheeky language that plays for humor value, but also shows us how much they're in love. I do want you to note the bird imagery, all right? And there's a lot of bird imagery in our story. What this bird imagery means, that's a different story. You can come up with your own interpretation. Some might call it sweet. Some might call it creepy. All right. The birds that they refer to sometimes are beautiful birds, like larks and nightingales. And other times they refer to each other as a falcon, a hawk. All right. Creepy, strange. So I think that's another important note. And that Juliet's language is, at times, overtly violent. That what she's saying borders lines on creepy. Here's a great example, and this is towards the very end of Act 2, Scene 2. Around line 185, she says, "Sweet, so would I, yet I should kill thee with much cherishing." Now this should make us pause. She would kill thee with much cherishing? Couldn't she find another word, that I want to smother you, that I want to kiss you, that I want to hold you, that I want to be with you, that she wants to kill him? Right. Clearly we have strong foreshadowing in this instance, that their death will come together. Act 2, Scene 3 introduces us to an important character, and his name is Friar Laurence. And Friar Lawrence's scene opens with a soliloquy. And in this soliloquy, we see him collecting herbs and plants, and while I can't say why that's important now, it is important to our story, so you should take note of it. He does make allusions. He makes an allusion to Titan's burning wheel. Titan is the sun god. So we get some strong allusions. And he very much seems to care for Mother Nature. And I think that's worth noting. He says on line 7 of Act 2, Scene 3, "I must upfill this austere cage of ours with baleful weeds and precious juiced flowers. The earth, that's nature's mother, is her tomb. What is her burying grave? That is her womb." So we see him very much this kind of nature-caring person. But notice his dark language, that he makes reference to womb. And notice what word womb rhymes with? Tomb. And he makes references to graves. All right? Friar Lawrence's language also alludes to the end of our story. So enters Romeo, and they start off with this kind of cheeky, "God bless you" language, "it's so good to see you." And Friar Laurence immediately notices that Romeo hasn't been home. And we're talking about now it's the early morning. He says around line 40, "Thou art uproused by some distempered nature. Or, if not so, then here I hit it right. Our Romeo hath not been in bed tonight." So he realizes that Romeo's been up all night, and he's a little nervous for it. All right. Friar Laurence is concerned that he spent the night with Rosaline. He says, God pardon sin. So he starts off with, you shameful person. All right. Wast thou with Rosaline? All right. Were you doing the dirty deed with Rosaline? And Romeo's response is, with Rosaline, my ghostly father? No. And then on line 46 he says, I have forgot that name, and that name's woe. Alright, so Romeo acknowledges in this scene, he's all done with Rosaline. She's yesterday. She is so, oh goodness, 2 hours and 4 minutes ago. Alright, we've moved on to the beautiful Juliet. Alright, and he says, on line 49, Romeo, I have been feasting with mine enemy. So he acknowledges this, that he's with the enemy, and I think that's important. He goes on to ask Friar Laurence for a big favor. Around line 63 and following, he says, we met, we wooed, and made exchange of vow. All right, and with that word vow, we know they're talking of marriage, that they want to be married ASAP, as soon as possible. So he says, I'll tell thee as we pass, but this I pray, that thou consent to marry us today. And Friar Lawrence's response is not what maybe we'd expect. He says, Holy Saint Francis. All right, like, oh my goodness, what are you two thinking? And he starts criticizing him. He says, young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts. And I think this is an important quote. In this instance, Friar Laurence is saying that your love isn't emotional, rather, it's physical. He's criticizing him. All right? And he says that you were just in love with Rosaline. What are you thinking? But Romeo's insistent that he's just in love with Juliet. And Friar Lawrence's only hope is that, and this is line 91, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. All right, and rancor means hatred. All right, that it'll turn these households that hate each other into love. And so that's the good that can come of this relationship. But Friar Laurence does not seem particularly positive about the situation. Act 2, Scene 4 begins with Benvolio and Mercutio. And they're speaking, and they've gotten a letter from Tybalt. He says on line 6 and following, Tybalt, the kinsman to old Capulet, hath sent a letter to his father's house. And Mercutio reveals that it's a challenge on my life. And Benvolio says, Romeo will answer it. And by answer it, he means he will accept the duel. Alright, so there's going to be a brawl later on, and this brawl will be important. But it's important to note that both Mercutio and Benvolio answer for Romeo. Alright, Romeo doesn't get to answer for himself. And I think that's important. Alright, that these two both jumped the gun of the situation. Mercutio, of course, continues with his overt, flamboyant, sexually charged language, just without even interpreting it. On line 15, he's talking about Cupid, and he says, love song, the very pin of his heart cleft with the blind boy's butt shaft. And is he a man to encounter Tybalt? All right, and it's just a strange order of words that he's using the word butt shaft. And of course, when he says butt shaft, he's not talking about what you may be thinking. He's talking about an unbarbed arrow used for practicing shooting at targets. That being said, when we hear butt shaft, we may be thinking of something else. So this language is extremely disturbing, charged, confusing at times. They talk about Tybalt, and Tybalt is the name of the Prince of Cats, and that's the first thing they call him. All right, more than Prince of Cats. All right, so Tybalt is associated with the name, and it's a common name for cats. All right, and it was in this famous fable and the fable was called Reynard the Fox. And in Reynard the Fox, the Prince of Cats' name was Tybalt. So this is a name that's fairly famous in fables. All right, and I think that's a fairly important note. And they use a lot of this kind of Italian attacking language. He says, the immoral passato, the punto reverso, and the hail. All right, these are all fencing terms. And each one is a different type of attack. Once Romeo enters the scene, the whole language of the play is disturbing and overt. Mercutio says, well, Benvolio is the first thing. He says, here comes Romeo, here comes Romeo. And Mercutio says, without his roe, like a dried herring, O flesh, how art thou fishified. It's just disgusting. It's just this, like, Mercutio, simmer down. This language is very overt. And if you have the Dejani Barnes & Noble Shakespeare, you can read some of the notes, and I think a lot of this language we would find shocking and disturbing. They do make a lot of reference to the flower, and Juliet's flower, and how Romeo's flower is well, what does he say? He says, why then is my pump well flowered? So, Romeo is extremely charged and desirous of Juliet. So I think we see this language persist throughout our story, and especially this scene. And this language continues right until the nurse and Peter enter. And the song that Mercutio sings to the nurse is so bawdy, they're making fun of her. And the song he sings, it starts on 123. He says, an old hare whore, and an old hare whore is very good meat in Lent. But a hare that is a whore is too much for a score when it whores ere it be spent. All right? So when we hear the word whore, you can't help but think of the word whore. That being said, they're also talking about a whore, which is a type of rabbit. It's a hare. And so, as charged as all of this is, it's really a poem about rabbits, but we know what rabbits are. They're like proverbial lusty, all right? They like to be desirous, all right? They multiply like rabbits is maybe a phrase you heard. And so the nurse is offended by this language, and so she starts using the same language that Mercutio is using. And it verges on creepy and terrifying and overt and gratuitous, maybe. And so that continues, and the nurse is really there to kind of talk to Romeo and find out about Romeo and, help Romeo and Juliet reunite. And that's really her goal. Act 2, Scene 5. So our important characters of this scene are Juliet and the nurse. And Juliet begins the scene, of course, with, no surprise, a soliloquy. She's alone on stage, and she sounds completely distressed. Note what she says. She's talking about the nurse, and she says, starting with line 1 in Act 2, Scene 5, the clock struck 9 when I did send the nurse. In half an hour she promised to return. Perchance she cannot meet him. That's not so. Oh, she is lame. All right, so she starts criticizing the nurse for not being faster. She continues around to line 11. Is 3 long hours, yet she is not come. Had she affections, had she feelings, and warm youthful blood, she would be as swift in motion as a ball. My words would bandy her to my sweet love, and his to me. But old folks, many fain as they were dead, unwieldy, slow, heavy, and pale as lead. All right, so we see a simile, all right, and she's calling the nurse slow, all right, old. And if the nurse hears this, she would certainly be offended. And it's possible that she hears just a little bit of this, because she comes in and she takes advantage of the situation. Here's Juliet, and her first question is, "Now, good sweet nurse, O Lord, why lookest thou sad?" All right, so Juliet notices that the nurse looks sad. And the nurse starts talking about how tired she is. She says, "I am a-weary." This is line 25 and following. "I am a-weary, give me leave a while. Fie, how my bones ache. What a jaunts, what a tiring journey." That's what a jaunts is. "Have I." All right, so she's like, this was the longest journey I've ever taken. Now, whether this was the longest journey, it probably wasn't. The nurse, though, sees a chance for her to exploit the situation, because the Juliet really wants to find out. And Juliet starts criticizing her. At first she says, "How art thou out of breath, when thou hast breath to say to me what thou art out of breath? The excuse that thou dost make in this delay is longer than the tale that dost excuse. Is thy news good or bad? Answer to that, say either, and I'll stay the circumstance. Let me be satisfied. Is it good or bad?" All right, she's like, you have to tell me what's going on. I need to know what Romeo is thinking. And the nurse just kind of plays confused, she continues on with the language. This is line 48. "Lord, how my head aches. What a head have I. It beats as if it would fall in 20 pieces. And my back, oh, my back at the other side." All right, and so she convinces Juliet to kind of give her a back rub. She says, "It's the other side. Oh, my back, beshrew your heart for sending me about to catch my death with jauncing up and down." All right, so she exploits the situation, and Juliet has sucker written all over her face because she falls for it. That is until the nurse takes a little too advantage of the situation. Juliet says, "Tell me, what says my love?" And the nurse responds, "Your love says, like an honest gentleman, and a courteous and a kind and a handsome, and I warrant a virtuous, where is your mother?" So she changes the topic from talking about Romeo to, "Where is your mother?" And Juliet's response is, "Where is my mother? Why, she is within. Where should she be? How oddly thou repliest. Your love says, like an honest gentleman, where is your mother?" All right, so she is absolutely distraught at this. How could you say that? I'm absolutely offended. All right. And so the nurse talks about fetching a ladder, all right, which I think is an important little moment. These ladders are later known as cords. And this is line 73 and following. She says, "I must another way to fetch a ladder, by that which your love must climb a bird's nest soon when it is dark." All right, so he's going to sneak into her bedroom. And this is a great illusion. Right. And in this illusion, she says, "High to high fortune." So we get this allusion to fortune. Fortune is so wonderful. It's so fantastic. So I think that's a great scene. All right, so at the end of the scene, all right, the nurse has played Juliet for a fool. And she got a back rub out of it. And I think that's important. All right, and she's also going to help Romeo sneak in. And I think that's important as well. All right, that... Oops. Spelling, of course. That the nurse is willing to go a little bit further to help Juliet. The final scene of Act 2 is between Friar Laurence, Romeo, and Juliet. And Friar Lawrence's language is a little disturbing. Starting on line 9, notice how violent his language is. These violent delights have violent ends. All right, that these spurious kind of quick-hearted actions, they have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which, as they kiss, consume. So maybe he's warning the lovers that this might end in death, which is foreshadowing the rest of our play. And so it seems at the end of this scene that the marriage occurs. It's never 100% stated when the marriage occurs. It could have happened in a whole bunch of scenes, but if there is a marriage to occur, it seems like it would occur at the end of this scene. He says, all right, come with me, and this is at the end of the scene, line 35 and following. Come with me, and we will make short work. For by your leaves you shall not stay alone, till Holy Church incorporate two in one. That the two, you can't do anything sexually, all right? This is too much too soon, all right? And if you are going to do anything sexually, you must get married, all right? Till the Holy Church incorporate two in one, all right? So that's why he's advising them to stay alone. And so that ends Act 2. So from here we move on to the climax of the story, where events start unfolding, the climax of our story. And until this point, I think things have been fairly bawdy, fairly comical, but after this we're going to have a real turn of the story. We're going to see more drama, more action, more fights, more surprises. So that's something to look forward to. So look forward to the Act 3 video, and be sure to like my video and give good responses, and hopefully you found this to be helpful. Be sure to download the V-Notes from my website if you need access to my notes, all right, and you are unaware where to find them. All right. You can find them on my website, pbworks.com. Alright. Alright. And if you have any questions, be sure to stop by for extra help. Or if you're someone else who's watching the video and you're not in my class, feel free to stop by and ask me, or send me an email, or drop a note in the comment section. Thanks for listening.